Harvest House and what we do and meeting people where it hurts. And I don't know if you all know this, I'm very, very pregnant and get kind of emotional, so like that was maybe a bad choice. No, I'm going to cry. It's fine. We're going to be fine. So Jim asked me to speak about Harvest House today, and two thoughts ran through my mind. The first one is that I really don't like public speaking. I feel like God has grown me in that a little bit. I'm getting a little bit better at it. But this morning I realized worse than public speaking, I was telling Isaac this earlier, is wearing a mic pack during worship when I can't carry a tune. There's like this fear of like coming on and my voice being really loud, and we made it through it. Thank you for not pushing any buttons over there. The other thing I thought about is that he only asked me to speak when I'm pregnant. And like really three of the 4 times that I've spoken, I've been pregnant. I'm pregnant like every other year. So I mean, it's a thing. But I realize that it's probably because I talk ridiculously fast. And so when I'm pregnant, I have to slow down so I can catch my breath. So he might actually be onto something. It's not a bad idea. But anyway, I am here to talk about Harvest House this morning, which is a ministry that Aaron and I have been involved in for almost 7 years now. And I had a hard time putting thoughts together for this morning. Because generally when I'm asked to speak, I kind of dust off the same speech and update the stories a little bit. But this time it felt a little bit different, I think, because most of you have probably heard about Harvest House, at least to some extent. And because with almost 7 years of experience now, I feel like the way that we look at people and how God loves them has kind of changed over those years as well. We see in James 1:27, it's the verse that says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Before I get too into it, I want to say something about the slideshow that you'll see on the screen. The pictures up there were put together randomly, separately from me writing this. And it's important that you know that when I'm talking about people in this, they're not going to be the faces you see up there. They don't go together. So if you hear me talking about some crazy thing that happened and you see a face up there, it's not the same person. So just as a disclaimer, we're respecting their privacy. These are their stories to tell in a lot of ways. So I just want to make sure you all knew that. Harvest House, for those of you that don't know, is a family-style home, this home actually, for at-risk young women. What that really means in its current form is that our family has young women who need a stable environment come and live with us. They're often coming from neglect or abuse or harm that's either other-inflicted or self-inflicted. And some just need a roof over their head and people to be telling them that they're loved. There's an application process and we have a board of directors. Gets a little bit formal, but then as they move in, we sit down with each of the young ladies to determine what services we need to connect them with, as well as to create an individual development plan or a set of goals that'll get them from where they are now to where they want to be. We talk about things like schooling and career, personal goals, educational goals, and each one is very individualized. There's no cookie-cutter way to do it. Some of these young women have children, so that affects what their goals are going to be and how they're going to get there. Some need to finish high school, some want to go to college, others are working on career training. And sometimes they have a really hard time defining those goals because they've never been able to think outside of immediate survival. What do I need to get through today, not where do I want to be in 5 years? So sometimes we have a hard time even getting them to think into the future. Where do you want to go and how can we help you get there? Because they don't know. Once we have an idea, though, we frame it in these small, manageable chunks so that they can see progress, they can see goal accomplishment. And again, it's very individualized, and I don't generally really care what they're working towards as long as they're working towards something. At the end of the day, the ministry is about loving people who may have slipped through the cracks in some way, or as the lyrics in that song said, the silent and the see-through. Many years ago, Harvest House was just a dream. Harvest Youth Ministries, our parent organization, ran 2 teen centers, the cellar and the attic, where we gave kids a safe place to go, and we watched for opportunities to tell them about Jesus. I always thought it was interesting when I told people I worked with teenagers or worked at a teen center, because most of the time they go, why? Why would you do that? I think teenagers are pretty awesome. They can be a little crazy, but they're pretty awesome. And people think working with teenagers and caring for them is great as long as somebody else is doing it and it's not in their neighborhood. Go ahead, love on them, but do it somewhere else because meh. They don't like it. At one of the teen centers one time, we had a woman come in and say, you guys need to go out and clean up the trash out front. And I don't know if y'all know Jim, but he is not a big fan of trash and stuff being messy and out. So that's one of the things we checked regularly. Is everything outside looking good, under control? We stuck our head out the door and kind of looked around. And it only took a few minutes to figure out that what this woman was talking about was the teenagers that were hanging outside waiting for the rides. They were the trash that we need to clean up. Again, pregnant, gotta not cry. We heard all kinds of stories about young people that were doing the best they could with some crazy life circumstances. And one that sticks out in my mind, and still is kind of one of those things I can't shake, is this young lady who told me that she almost never went home. She slept on her friends' couches if they would allow it, and her own parents rarely knew where she was. She was 14 years old. For a lot of these situations, abuse is probably too strong of a word, but neglect fits about right. Over time, as we're hearing these stories, I learned to hide my shock, and when they told us about their home lives and the drama that surrounded them, it didn't very often catch me off guard, although even now I still will hear their stories and then go home and cry like a baby because they're just that heart-wrenching. Either way, we were getting to know these kids and spending time with them. We would invite them to Bible studies. We'd drive them to church, and if they got a great report card, we'd take them out to ice cream. We did our best to counsel them, provide them with resources, and of course, continued to try to point them to the Lord. I had teenagers that called me mom when I was no more than 20 years old. They needed people in their life to come around them and to tell them that they're loved. At the end of the day, though, we dropped them back off at their houses and hoped for the best until we saw them again. We tried to live out this verse in 1 Thessalonians 2:8, which says, because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Enter Harvest House. What if we don't have to drop them off? What if they could live in a family environment where they see what family dinner around the table looks like? Where someone cared if they were safe and in bed at night? Where they got help with homework and boy troubles and navigating some of the messes they got themselves into. In fact, as I was getting ready for this, I was looking through some cards that I'd been given. And this one says, it means a lot to have someone who asks how you're doing in school, who wonders whether your coat is warm enough, and who cares if you're hanging out with the right people. What started as a dream turned into a reality many years later, first with another couple as the house parents, and then with Aaron and I moving in to parent some of these young women. In our time there, we've had a lot of girls come and go. They were coming from situations of neglect, abuse, some self-inflicted issues, some issues that were beyond their controls. And what we offer is a family home with 2 parents and no cost to them, so they can focus on changing their lives for their futures. Some of these girls left with stories of great victories. Some left and broke our hearts. But all of them were exposed to family life and the love of Jesus. In fact, when they live there, these girls have access to me and Aaron 24 hours a day. They get to see how we interact, the way we raise our children, how we take care of our home, and really most aspects of our life, which is super fun when you're having a bad day. Like, yes, please, this is going well. But what it comes down to is it's not a few hours a week or when it's super convenient. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're always on call. We're always available. Our goal at Harvest House is not to be these strict holy rollers who rule with an iron fist and throw the Bible at them every time they mess up, because they do mess up. So do we. We're there to be a safe place where they get to figure out who God says they are without all of the influences of the world around them. They get to see themselves in the light of Jesus, in the light of a family who says they're valuable, in the light of a family that says we aren't going to stand for abuse, and who tells them that they're worthwhile. They're worth investing in. I actually heard a statistic yesterday at a conference, and I don't know the source, but I know this woman does her research, so I'm confident in this. She said each of us has 9,000 to 60,000 thoughts in a day. She said of those, 80% are generally negative. And of all those thoughts, 90% of those are repetitive from the day before. We want to break that cycle. We need to replace those lies with truth and tell them things that they actually want to have on repeat in their minds, and not these lies that the world keeps throwing at them. We want to show them grace when things get hard, to share how we have struggled and overcome, and tell them how they can too. We point to Jesus, to resources outside our home, to make sure that they're hearing the same message in as many different ways as we can get it to them. In fact, we have this one woman, Julie, who has mentored no fewer than 4 of these girls and continues to blow them away with this fierce mama love that reinforces everything we say about family and about the love of Jesus. Now, when we moved in, we were told that this was going to be too hard for our family. There was great concern for the safety of our children, and we only had 2 at the time. I was very pregnant again, but we only had 2 at the time. We had twins on the way. Our family's grown since then, but there was great concern for our kids. There was question if our marriage and if our faith would survive the stress of these women living in our house and us being available to them around the clock. Now, I have never once been concerned for the safety of our children. Between a lot of prayer and some strategic planning, we've been pretty confident that they will be safe and taken care of, and that is not a problem. But I'd be a liar if I said being in this ministry wasn't hard. Aaron and I don't always want to handle things the same way. We have slightly different personalities, and that actually works really well most of the time. But some of these young women have pushed us to the edge of what we thought we could deal with. Some of them, again, have broken our hearts. And it's usually at this point in this talk that I would tell you about some end-story victories. Weddings Aaron has officiated, college graduations, baptisms, counseling victories. And we like to talk about all of them, but today I thought I'd take a little bit different approach and tell you some of the stories that I don't bring out as often. Some of the victories on the journey that might seem small, but were huge in these moments for these young ladies and the goals that they were working toward. Again, as a disclaimer, as I'm telling these stories, I can hear their names and I can see their faces, and thinking about where they were and where they are now often makes me cry. So I'm going to try to get through it without crying, but these are women with actual faces and actual names, and I think that's important for us to remember and realize. They're not hypothetical situations. They're not people that I heard a story of somebody else who knew. These are women that we have seen in our lives, and we have seen God change their hearts. For example, let me tell you about a young lady who had scars on her arms that were so thin and close together they almost looked like a barcode. Someone in her life had exposed her to cutting as a way to control and manage the pain and the difficulties and the things that were hurting her. She had quite a bit in her life that was hurting her. What they didn't bother to tell her was that this particular action would have her enslaved to it for the next 10 years. One night I remember picking her up from a friend's house, and I had to decide if she needed to go to a doctor to get her arms looked at, or if we could bring her home and clean her up there. It was a struggle for her, and as I caught on, she got better about hiding it. And one night she called me while I was working at the thrift store and asked if she could come talk to me. She handed me this little black box and told me not to open it. I still have the little black box. I taped it shut, that way she would always know I hadn't opened it. Inside the box is her razor blade. And she knew that night was going to be really hard for her. But she gave me a razor blade. That was a victory. Or, one night I get a phone call. It says, I don't know what happened, but we got in a fight again. But instead of telling me how things escalated and the police were called, which was what happened the last time, she said, so I told her I needed to leave. I got in my car, and I called you. I'm so sorry. I was trying to be calm, and I interrupted her. Before she could finish, I said, okay, I need you to hear me. I said, I am so proud of you. She couldn't see how she had done anything differently. But she had made better choices. So we went back through the entire night outlining how she had kept the commitment that she made. She finished some hard work that she had been putting off and didn't want to do. And she walked away from a fight. I got to show her how she had changed and matured, and she had handled the situation differently. And that was a victory. We once had a young lady who lived with us that didn't always enjoy telling the truth, or at least not the whole truth. And one morning we were sitting around eating breakfast, and one of us had asked her a question, And she lied to us emphatically. Like, there was no backing down. And we both knew it was a lie. So she left, and we kind of stared at each other and said, what just happened? Like, it was about something completely ridiculous that didn't matter. What in the world just happened? A few minutes later, she walks back in and says, that was a lie. I don't know why I said it. She asked for forgiveness, and we got to move on from there. Now, it didn't solve every problem, and she continued to lie to us in other areas, but that moment when she came back in was a victory. For some of our less motivated residents, I got in the habit of making them checklists. Here's what needs to be done today. They didn't always love this, and in fact, a couple of them really hated it. The accountability was not super fun for them. But when they successfully completed it each day, victory. I actually had a young woman who moved out. She got married, had a baby, and she messaged me and said, I missed your checklist. Can you please make me one now? Right? That's what I said. This is one that fought me a lot. She's simply seeing the need for structure in her life now. Victory. There was one time when I was having a bad day, and I don't remember specifically what I was complaining about, but before the day was over, I had a 3-page letter in my hand, which I still have, reminding me of how I served my family and what I meant to one of these young ladies. Being able to see past yourself to encourage somebody else is a victory. We've had young women who live with us that have very specific battles to overcome. Cutting, eating disorders, keeping commitments, you name it, we have probably seen it. So one of the things I like to do is put a grid up on the fridge with about 4 weeks of boxes, and it just has their name at the top and then some empty squares. There's no dates, there's no timeline, there's none of that. When they conquer that battle that day, put a sticker up in the box. And if you don't, that's okay, we'll try again tomorrow. It gave me a visual to see if stickers were being added without having to ask them how some of these things were going that was really hurting them in their lives. And if they missed a day, they just tried again the next day. It was fine. It gave them hope that there was no big gaps. And as soon as that chart got filled up, we celebrated. We would go out to coffee or ice cream or whatever they wanted to do, we celebrated. Because those were all victories. In fact, the young lady who started this trend with me told me recently that her family still uses sticker charts in their lives now, which I'm a big fan of still. My kids use them. I recently received a message from one of the young ladies that lived with us that said this: I feel like I put you guys through hell. Looking back, I was so lost and hurt, I didn't know what to do, and I barely cared. I needed you guys more than you'll ever know. Harvest House wasn't just a place to stay. It was home and your family, and I honestly believe I wouldn't have made it without your family and the structure of your house. To which I replied, you did, definitely. But I learned more from her, I think, than she learned from us. And I don't share this story or any of these stories to say, look at how great we are. It's not about us. It's about God changing their hearts. This young lady taught me a lot about things that I never really wanted to know about. Her struggles were deep and varied and difficult. And in fact, this particular young lady came with me to an event one night where I had 4 to 5 sentences to share about Harvest House at the beginning of this charity event. I was sitting in the car, fairly nervous about what to say, and I remember very exasperated going, I don't know what to say. Almost exactly like that. I don't know what we're gonna do. So she very quietly says, well, you could tell them without Harvest House, I wouldn't be alive. There was silence in the car. Tell me more. What do you mean? She had been kicked out of her house and had no idea where she was going. She told me she was determined not to spend the night in a homeless shelter or on the street because she was done fighting and she didn't want to have to worry about being attacked. She didn't want to have to worry about protecting herself. She said, I had a knife, I had a plan, that was all I needed. Now, a friend connected her to Harvest House, where she spent a very awkward first night in a strange place with strange people. But the next morning, she was alive. And one night turned into 2 years of loving on her and pouring truth into her and grace of Jesus into her. We watched her graduate from college, pursue her dream job, and I even got to go wedding dress shopping with her. Now, it has not been all sunshine and roses since then, but she's alive, and she knows we're here if she needs us. All victories. The other young woman in my car that night also claimed that Harvest House had kept her alive. Her death probably would not have come so quickly. The road she was on was filled with medications and alcohol and substance abuse that probably would have led her to an early grave. Those two girls are alive because somebody believed in Harvest House, appointed them to us, and made it available to them. In fact, that second one, we had donors buy her a plane ticket to fly from where she was to where we were so that she could participate in this program. We have had young women, and we've helped them see the need to go to trained counselors and make those first appointments with them. We've attended classes and appointments to help with medical issues. We've walked through job troubles, facing disappointment, how we make the next right choice when things seem overwhelming. There have been very long nights of counseling, hours of discussion, and we have walked alongside of them as they've dealt with self-harm and self-medicating, self-abuse. We have sat up with girls at night to make sure they were live in the morning. We've had to drop young women off at the emergency room when their problems became so overwhelming that they couldn't be trusted to make good decisions with their own lives. I have been on the receiving end of late night phone calls from young ladies asking me to give them just one reason to stay alive. One reason that life was worth living. We have enforced curfews, we've been the bad guys, and I've often thought, what would my parents do in this situation? We're just kind of making it up as we go. We've never even had teenagers before. We rely so heavily on prayer and guidance from the Lord to walk us through each day with these girls. We've read up on things and learned about all sorts of different issues like codependency, eating disorders, self-harm, suicidal tendencies and warning signs, responses to sexual abuse, attention-seeking behaviors, and a whole lot more. We're not experts, we don't claim to be, and we often refer to these women to professionals outside of our home that can help them with these situations better than we can. But there have been moments where we've had to make split-second decisions about how to handle things that came our way, and we relied a lot on the training and preparation God has given us. None of it is easy. Most of it breaks my heart. But we have done our best to love them and point them to Jesus. And here's why I share this. It's really easy for the pride in my heart to want to stand up here and show a slideshow of images of young women who have lived in our house and tell you how great everything's going now. How they call me all the time and they come home for Christmas and how we still have strong relationships with all of them. And that's true for some, but not for all. Some of these young ladies refuse to speak to me. Some of them want nothing to do with Jesus. Others only call when there's no better option. We've had young women move out and go on to drug rehab facilities. We've seen pregnancies for young women who aren't married. We've had custody struggles, marriage struggles, parenting struggles. But if they call us, we're there, and we will love them right through it. In our dining room, we have a wall where we hang pictures of young ladies who have spent time with us, and I actually sat and was looking at those pictures as I was writing part of this. And I'll tell you, those pictures bring back memories of joy and heartache, of sleepless nights and amazing celebrations. Each one of them, whether they like it or not, is still a part of our family. And their move-out day is not the day that that relationship ends unless they want it to. We're still there for them. We will still help them through whatever life throws at them. And we'll keep pointing them towards Jesus. We've had a few situations where young women couldn't live with us any longer, either because of something that went on in their lives or because they refused to work towards goals. We've also had a few move out when we really believed that it would be better for them to stay longer so that we could help them and continue to work with them. Recently, though, I was reminded of the story of the prodigal son. And I'm going to read you Luke 11 to 24. And really, if you can pay attention to the father as I'm reading this. It says, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate,' which in that time was basically like saying, 'Hey, I wish you were dead. Give me what I'm going to get when you die.' So he divided his property between them, the father. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. I was reminded recently that the father never begged the son to stay, at least not that we're told. He didn't yell and scream. I would guess there was probably a little bit of discussion, and if he was like anything like me, there were probably some tears shed behind closed doors. But it was a good reminder that we can't force good choices on any of them. We can't change them if they don't want to change or aren't ready, and I can't make them fall in love with Jesus. We had a young woman leave our home one time under pretty bad circumstances. She left and went to Teen Challenge, a long-term residential drug program. And while she was here, she had struggled to pass her GED. And I told her when she passed, we would throw her a graduation party. About 18 months after she moved out, About 18 months after she moved out, I got to swing open the door, tell her welcome home, and we had that party. It wasn't just to celebrate the GED, but a lot like that prodigal son, her return to life in Jesus. To this day, each of those women who have left is worth the celebration. Each of them has the ability to pick up the phone and call me. My phone number hasn't changed in 18 years. Hopefully, those that are involved in our lives will continue to be, and those that aren't will one day reach out. Our job, as Aaron often reminds me, is to be faithful with writing our part of their story. I pray that when they look back at Harvest House, they would know that they were loved and known and wanted and celebrated. But it's my deepest desire that these women would go on to know and love the Lord and truly embrace the good he has for them. Now, again, Aaron and I have been involved with this ministry as house parents for about 6.5 years. We've learned a lot about relating to people, how to encourage them, how to point them to the Lord. And as our family grows, it becomes a little bit harder to do this ministry in our house. As Aaron has often mentioned in his sermon, 7 kids are loud. We're currently looking for ways to adjust the ministry to better serve the community, using what we've learned as a launching pad. One of the ways we want to do this is to expand the ministry beyond the residential. A lot of people desperately want help, but don't really want to give up their autonomy. They don't necessarily want that family-style environment, especially if they're used to being on their own. So we're brainstorming ways to meet needs, present the gospel, and work with our community in non-residential ways. We're also considering and praying about another facility with expanded occupancy that would still have house parents, but might not be set up quite the same way. We're having serious talks about how this ministry will look in the future and what it'll look like for our family. And I'm excited to see where God is going to take us. More than anything, we'd love your prayers. We would love for you to ask us how things are going. And if we bring young women to church with us, we would love you guys to continue to love on them and pray for them and embrace them like you have so far. We are grateful to have a church home where we can show up with random people and no one thinks it's weird. Where these girls can come and be safe. And again, that this is an extension of our home where y'all reinforce the same messages we're telling them there. The same message of God's love that these girls are desperate to hear, whether they'll admit it or not. If you guys want to come up, you can. If you want to make a difference in the world, I was reminded of this again yesterday, you don't need to start an organization, and you don't need to invite somebody to live in your home, although you could. All you have to do is be faithful with right now. Who do you know that might feel silenced or see-through? Who do you know that might slip through the cracks? Call them and make an actual plan to get together. Now, the house keys that we give the girls are a big deal for me, and most of the time they keep their keys when they move out. God set these girls in the family, and although they all knock on the door when they come over, I hope that key symbolizes for them the family that they have and the family that God set them in. I still have a key to my parents' house. We're family. So I also wanted to ask you, while we're here today, if any of you need a key. Not to my house, because that might be weird, but to Jesus. If any of you guys don't have that relationship or have never been told that you are valuable or worthwhile or worth investing in, let me know. I actually was at a conference, and I have a key that I'd be happy to hand you if you need to know about the Lord. Thank you.